What's poppin', Vampire Hunters? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show. This video will be a breakdown of the Marvel movie that started the superhero movie renaissance, 1998's Blade, with a little bit of fun movie trivia on the side. So grab a blood bag and a straw, because we're going into this breakdown raw! Originally released in August 1998, the first Blade movie was written by David S. Goyer and directed by Stephen Norrington, and of course starring Wesley Snipes in his iconic role as the titular Blade the Vampire Hunter. However, as beloved as Wesley Snipes' Blade would become, Snipes was not the only actor considered for the role. In fact, at one point, New Line Cinemas wanted to completely race-swap Blade and make the character a white vampire hunter instead. But thankfully, David Goyer immediately shot that terrible-ass idea down. Thank you, David, you are invited to the cookout. But after that, Mike DeLuca, the head of New Line Cinemas, had Denzel Washington, LL Cool J, and Lawrence Fishburne in the running as well, before Wesley eventually sniped the role at the insistence of David Goyer. And of course, Lawrence Fishburne would end up starring in his own iconic role as Morpheus in The Matrix a year after Blade's debut. So it's clear that 90s Hollywood had a lot of faith in Lawrence Fishburne kicking ass and looking good in sunglasses. But anyways, when the movie starts with Blade's mother, Vanessa Brooks, being rushed into the emergency room, her wallet falls to the ground in all the commotion, giving us a clear view of her driver's license, which details that Vanessa lives at 125 2nd Boulevard, apartment 201 in Braxton, Florida. We also see that she was single, 5'7", weighed 128 pounds, and was born on February 16th, 1944. And after her wallet hits the ground, her library card as well as her MasterCard credit card fall past the frame as well. Then, after a bloody baby Eric gets taken away from his mother, notice how Vanessa keeps her arm reaching upwards as the sound of her flatlining can be heard in the background. I think that this was the movie's clever way of showing us a quick glimpse at Vanessa's transformation into an undead vampire, because typically, when somebody flatlines, their arms go limp. Typically. But this introduction is drastically different from Blade's origin story in the comics, as the original Blade's mother wasn't named Vanessa at all, but instead Tara Brooks. And though Tara does get bitten by a vampire while she was pregnant, Tara unfortunately does not survive her bite like Vanessa does later on in the movie, which is a bummer for Tara. And while Vanessa being bitten by a vampire while she was pregnant is the reason why Eric Brooks can walk around in the daytime as a half-vampire, half-human hybrid, the Blade in the comics was not originally born a daywalker at all, but instead he grew up as a normal human being who had the luxury of vampire bites not affecting him at all. It wasn't until Marvel Comics started changing the character of Blade as a result of the success of this movie that Blade actually became a daywalking vampire, courtesy of one Dr. Michael Morbius giving him a nice hickey. But anyways, later on, when Tracy Lord's Raquel the Vampire leads her unsuspecting dinner date through that factory floor of human meat on their way to the Vampire Club, the poorly dressed, soon-to-be traumatized man notices a bunch of human beings in blood bags being carted away. While this is meant to, of course, point to one of the many sources of blood that the vampires use for food, these human-sized blood bags were actually supposed to play a bigger part in the story originally. According to production designer Kirk Petruccelli, Deacon Frost was initially supposed to reveal that he had massive storages of these human bodies in preparation for the day that he would use the Lamagra blood god to turn every single human being on the planet into a vampire. Because if everybody on the world is a vampire, then that vampire planet is going to need a food source, or else everybody dies. But anyways, after all those vampire freaks get their disgusting bloodbath through those sprinklers, we finally get the first appearance of the adult Blade, with a new and improved look and personality that had not yet been seen in the comic books. Because you see, in the comics, Blade wasn't always this badass. In fact, after these movies were released, Marvel drastically altered the entire character of Blade in the comic book continuity to closely match Wesley Snipes' iteration, as the character at that time was very much struggling in popularity amongst the readers. But anyways, when that vampire brings her date to that nightclub of Night Stalkers, we get our first look at this universe's depiction of vampires. Vampires that the Blade producers made sure were radically different from what people traditionally knew about the typically romantic personalities of vampires. Starting the movie off with a literal bloodbath inside of a nightclub secretly inside of a human meat factory, David Goyer does a rather fantastic job at showing the audience how unconcerned with the moralities of humanity that these vampires are, while still at the same time showing us that these vampires enjoy a lot of the same recreational activities that modern day humanity enjoyed at the time. Having these vampires look and dress like regular young people rather than your traditional Count Draculas or the Count from Sesame Street honestly helped this new universe feel a lot more scarier, because these vampires can literally walk amongst society at night and blend in perfectly. But anyways, when Blade finally arrives to the nightclub scene wearing sunglasses at night to watch the vampires breathe their last storylines, we can finally see how much this movie was inspired by Chinese cinema. In fact, it was Wesley Snipes himself who came into the project specifically with the deep desire to make a kick-ass superhero action film that felt as badass as the martial arts films that they were making in Hong Kong. But anyways, after Blade kills 22 vampires in the club, I like how they ended that sequence with Blade essentially crucifying Quinn. And although Christian iconography like crosses don't kill vampires in this universe, I like how they still threw a nod to that type of traditional holy vampire execution style by pinning the vampire Quinn to the wall like Jesus and then burning him alive. But unfortunately, also very much like Jesus, Quinn would return from the grave. Also, if you're wondering, Blade will apparently kill a total of 88 vampires over the course of this movie. So for the love of God, give that man a good Yelp review. That's just some good service right there. And also, fun fact, when the police arrived to find Quinn burning alive, we were originally supposed to get a Stan Lee cameo here as one of the cops, but his cameo was unfortunately cut. I also really enjoyed how they made Blade mysteriously disappear before the police arrived on the scene in a very Batman-esque way. This feels extremely intentional to me, as screenwriter David Goyer has said that they all looked very closely at the Batman movies for guidance and inspiration while crafting this movie, specifically the Batman film by Tim Burton and its realistically dark atmosphere. Goyer's deep love for the Batman world would, of course, eventually land him as the story writer for the Nolan Batman trilogy, as well as the screenwriter and executive producer for Batman v Superman. One of those things is a lot better than the other, but I won't say. With both Blade and Batman being nighttime Avengers, taking creative inspiration from Michael Keaton's Batman movie was definitely a wise decision, especially knowing that they purposely made the effort to avoid the cheesy mistakes of the Batman sequels that followed. Sequels that significantly toned down the adult themes and violence in order to appease parents and tap into a younger audience. And during the hospital scene, when a charred and resurrected Quinn attacks an unsuspecting Karen, actor Donald Logue actually dislodged his jaw after his face accidentally forcefully landed on the ground. And after screaming out in pain, the production had to ironically rush Logue from their fake hospital to an actual real hospital while he was still in the makeup of a dead burn victim, which freaked out pretty much everybody at the hospital. And later, as Whistler checks out a bitten Karen Jensen's wounds, we can see that Whistler is still wearing his wedding ring, giving the audience a hint that Whistler used to have some type of close family in the past, before Whistler reveals later on in the film that his wife and 2 daughters were brutally slain by vampires. And actually, the character of Abraham Whistler is an original creation for the Blade movie, made to be a loose adaptation of comic book Blade's actual original mentor, Jamal Afari. In the comics, Jamal Afari is an old black vampire hunter who ends up being the one to take Eric in and teaching him everything he knows about making vampires run for their lives, or their afterlives, or whatever types of lives vampires actually have. I'm not sure why they felt the need to do that, and I very much hope that Marvel Studios includes the Jamal Afari character in their adaptation. But anyways, later, when Whistler tells Blade to steady Karen on the table, we can see a great example of just how strong the film's main hero is when he uses just one hand to keep a convulsing Karen from shaking her ass off the table. And right after this, when we meet the Council of Vampires sitting together at a glass table, notice how the tops of all of their chairs are all curved. I believe this design choice was a direct nod to the design of traditional famous vampires like Count Dracula, who would oftentimes wear capes with curved collars. So all the vampires on the council all sort of look like they're wearing curved vampire cape collars themselves as they sit back. Like, this was a super dope choice in my opinion, because all of these council members essentially represent the classic vampires of old, who likely probably did have a wardrobe similar to your Count Draculas or your Count Chocula's at one point in their extremely long-lived lives as pureblood vampires. And also, learning that Stephen Dorff's Deacon Frost is not one of these pureblood vampires, but instead merely a former human who was converted into a vampire very much reflects his character's personality and motivations, in my opinion. Because human beings as a species have historically had strong proclivities towards conquering other people that they see as weak and consuming things in excess, it seems to me that the filmmakers are heavily implying that the malicious and evil part of Deacon Frost's personality is heavily rooted in his human DNA. Because the pureblood vampires in the council were naturally born that way, they appear to completely lack Deacon Frost's very human-like thirst for living beyond one's means and insatiably reaching out for more. Like, these old vampires are perfectly content with just being left alone and hiding in the shadows, with humanity ruling the world, and Deacon Frost is not about that. But anyways, a little later when Dragonetti confronts Deacon Frost while he's translating the sacred vampire texts On a big-ass CRT computer screen, the translated text on the right of the screen seemingly tells the story of the origins of vampires in this universe, specifically how the blood god La Magra used to rule a completely dark earth as the god of all vampires, until an ancient force that the vampires of old referred to as the Unholy One defied La Magra's rule and built a prison for the blood god before supposedly creating the day and night cycle, thus forcing all the vampires to hide in the shadows while humanity evolved and prospered. But the prophecy does leave the vampires with a sense of hope when it promises that humanity will end up destroying their own selves by destroying their habitat, which is true, and that the coming return of the blood god will convert all of humanity into vampires and allow the vampire species to reclaim the planet that was stolen from them. I wrote the entire prophecy out just for you and will now place it on the screen here, just in case some of you were thinking about changing religions anytime soon. Blood god, yum yum blood god. All hail the blood god. What a mighty blood god we serve. But anyways, after Blade drops Karen back into the daylight, she heads back into her apartment. I really like how the set designers decorated her sunlit space with a little smiling sun, as well as a painting of a sunflower, as all of that serves to give the audience a false sense of solar security. A sense of security that gets shattered by Officer Krieger right before Blade shatters Karen's table with Krieger's body. And later, when Krieger runs away from Blade, we can see Blade whips out a weird-looking square gun. That machine pistol is actually two real-life guns combined into one, with the trigger half of the gun being a MAC-11 and the front half of the gun being the casing of a MAC-10. And later, as Blade has a car chase with Officer Krieger, we can see director Stephen Norrington feasting on a woman on a nearby street corner, which I thought was a fun little Easter egg. But anyways, as Blade and Karen prepare to enter the building that the cop just went into, we can see a boxing poster for Donner versus Fresno. This poster was actually featured in episode 12 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. So technically, Blade takes place in the Star Trek universe. Okay, not really, but it's more fun to just think it is. I can see Jean-Luc Picard as a vampire.
Captain's log. I'm thirsty for blood.
Then, as Blade and Karen make their way to the back of a club full of sunglass-wearing Japanese vampires, they run into the extremely large vampire Pearl hidden within the club's refrigerator, which is hilarious considering that Pearl clearly has some type of dieting issue. I mean, if you count eating human babies and infants a dieting issue anyway, which is exactly how Pearl became that big, according to director Stephen Norrington. So, you know, don't feel too bad that Karen cooked that nutjob slob of a blob. Also, fun fact about how Pearl was made, there was actually 5 people inside of Pearl's body made up of $7,000 worth of silicone, with the actor Eric Edwards as the head of Pearl, 1 dude for the left arm, 1 dude for the right arm, and 2 people puppeting Pearl's legs. And after Pearl is cooked, Blade and Karen then enter the Erebus archives, where the pages of the vampire Bible known as the Book of Erebus are stored. An aptly named vampire Bible too, as Erebus was the god of primordial darkness according to Greek mythology. Also, I love how they made the design of Deacon Frost's sexy time bed look like a high-tech metal casket, as vampires are, of course, famously known for sleeping in coffins. The movie uses this metal bed the best during the Vanessa Brooks vampire reveal scene, as the metal coffin opening symbolically points to Vanessa rising from the grave that her son thought she was in this entire time. But anyways, as Deacon Frost makes his way through his house party while ignoring Krieger, you can see a vampire girl watching the Mortal Kombat movie on a TV screen, which was another adaptation from New Line Cinemas that came out a year prior in 1997. Then, after Whistler helps Blade and Karen escape the Erebus archives, the 3 start walking along the side of a train tunnel. But what is crazy about this moment is that Whistler inexplicably disappears from this scene completely after his bomb explosion causes him to lose his footing, only to reappear without explanation in the following scene. Where did Whistler even go? Like, how the hell does a normal senior citizen of a human being survive falling off the side of a tunnel onto the path of a moving train and survive? Something tells me that Whistler's original fate was probably to die during this moment, but they probably changed it to make Whistler into a vampire for a potential Blade sequel, but that's just a hypothesis for now. But anyways, I found the conversation that happens when Deacon Frost holds a little girl hostage to be quite interesting, because it shows how similar Blade and Deacon really are as half-blood vampires in their own unique ways. Deacon tries to recruit Blade to his cause, not just to manipulate Blade into giving up some of his special blood, but also because he can relate to Blade and how it feels to not 100% belong to any one group. They're both 2 powerful people that feel like outcasts to both humanity and the vampires. So the movie having Deacon try to extend an invitation to Blade to join his group despite everything that Blade has done to them seems to be reflective of Deacon Frost's overall hatred of being made to feel inferior by both the Vampire High Council and humanity at large. So he tried to reach out to his fellow underdog, but ends up calling Blade an Uncle Tom when Blade refuses to join him. But anyways, later on, after Deacon Frost finds Whistler's hideout and mortally wounds Whistler badly, Whistler calls Blade a son of a bitch, which is super great foreshadowing in my opinion, because Whistler was 100% on the money, as Blade's mother would prove to be a massive vampire bitch only a few short minutes later. I've known some blood-sucking bitches in my day. That's why I no longer use OkCupid. And as sad as this scene is for the movie, apparently Wesley Snipes could not stop cracking up. He just found the image of him lightly dabbing the wounds of a man bleeding all over the floor to be too damn funny to say in character. And honestly, I don't blame him. I'd probably do the exact same thing. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, why is he dabbing Whistler when it's not really doing anything? Seems kind of stupid. But anyways, in the following scene, we can see Blade cut the roots of the flower that he's been caring for. This flower is actually called the Dracaena leucospermum, and it's a hybrid of two different species of plants, much like Blade is a hybrid himself. Blade symbolically cuts the roots of this plant to also symbolically show his disdain for his own vampire roots after his quest to avenge his mother got his father figure killed. Blade echoes this mentality later on in the movie when he says, "I must release you," to his mother before killing her. I love that line so much because it both implies that Blade is both releasing his mother from her vampire corruption while also releasing her as the main motivation for his entire life. And then we get a dope-ass lobby fight scene that very much gives off the vibes of the lobby fight scene from The Matrix. But again, seeing as this movie predates The Matrix by a whole year, that simply could not be possible. It's just kind of weird that Hollywood produced two badass action sequences of a man in sunglasses clearing out a lobby full of goons in such quick succession like that. It was like back to back, basically. And at the end of the movie, we of course get that final sword fight between Blade and a powered up Deacon Frost with the power of the Blood God, a fight that was originally not in an earlier draft of the film. A deleted scene from the movie was supposed to have Deacon Frost completely transform into this massive, crappy CGI blood monster that was supposed to chase Blade around the room. But test audiences hated how it came out so much that they had to change the ending to make it more relatable. Two human-looking people fighting each other is much more interesting than a man fighting a giant red blob. I mean, what is this? Thor the Dark World? Get that shit out of here. But speaking of deleted scenes, when Blade and Karen say their goodbyes in the sunlight, an alternate scene was supposed to tease Dr. Michael Morbius at your service for Blade 2, with Morbius standing on top of a nearby building. However, of course, when they realized that the rights to Dr. Morbin Time belonged to Sony's Spider-Man deal, they had to scrap the entire scene and their plans for Morbius. Much like they had to scrap their plans for Whistler to appear in the movie's final moments when Blade arrives in Russia to fight vampires. Because apparently, right before the credits, one of the earlier plans was to have Whistler himself be the vampire Blade faces off against at the doors of the Russian club, which honestly would have been super dope, but I think Blade has been traumatized enough for one movie. Especially after his vampire mom tried to seduce him or whatever. What the hell was that scene about? Like, Jesus Christ, that made me so uncomfortable. Lesson of the day, if your mom starts to flirt with you, you should probably call Blade because she's probably a vampire, or from Alabama. Either one of those, call Blade, he'll take care of it. Just kidding. People from Alabama are totally fine and don't sleep with their mom, I think. I don't know. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this breakdown of Blade 1998. You can follow me at Mastertainment on Twitter, Instagram, or wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube because we got some interesting stuff for you guys all the time. And you guys do not want to miss out. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. You guys were amazing. And I love you guys. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.